Hello, my name is Alfie, and today I'm going to be doing a presentation on The Karate Kid, Old versus New. In the original, the main character is Daniel LaRusso. He's a teenager from Jersey who moves from California for his mother's new job. Daniel makes friends with a high school cheerleader which angers her ex-boyfriend, Johnny Lawrence, the best karate student at the local dojo where he is taught unethical uses of martial arts. Where Johnny and the rest of the Cobra Kai continue to bully Daniel, he turns to an old and wise karate teacher, Mr. Miyagi, who teaches Daniel the karate in order to fend the bullies off and defend his honour in the upcoming karate tournament. Though throughout his trainings Daniel bonds with his teacher, grows stronger and builds a strong relationship with Miyagi where they both learn from each other. The remake is quite similar, except it's got its own little twist on it as well. 12-year-old Dre Parker moves from Beijing after his mother gets a job transfer. When arriving in Beijing, he develops a young interest in a young girl named Mei Ying, who mirrors this affection. However, Cheng, a kung fu prodigy whose family is close with Mei Ying's, who attempts to keep the couple apart by continuously bullying Dre. When Dre gets his chance at some payback on the bullies, he is followed back to his apartment block where he is cornered and beaten up. This is when Mr. Han, a kung fu teacher, comes to his rescue and eventually, after persuading from Dre, teaches Dre the ways of kung fu to fight in the upcoming tournament against the bullies to earn their respect. As the friendship between student and teacher grows, Dre begins to teach Mr. Han a life lesson to help him overcome a painful tragedy of his past. The financial determinants of the first Karate Kid were a lot cheaper than the new one. They had a budget of $8 million and it made $90,815,558 on the box office. So that means that the gross profit was $82,815,558 million. The gross margin was 91.2% and the markup was 1,035%. It made $5,031,753 on the opening weekend, and it was released on the 22nd of June 1984. Some trivia for this was that the referee in the final match's name is Pat E. Johnson, a karate expert and former student of Chuck Norris. He instructed many movie stars in karate, and he is a credited fight instructor choreographer for the film. And Martin Kove, who plays John Kreese's character, was rumoured to have been replaced by Chuck Norris, who allegedly turned down the role of Kreese because he did not want karate teachers to be shown in an unsympathetic light. Norris has said since that he was not offered the role, but if he had been, he would have declined for similar reasons. And also Charlie Sheen also turned down the role of Daniel LaRusso. In Karate Kid 2010, the budget was a lot higher at $40 million. It made $389,126,022 in the box office. The gross profit was $319,126,022. The gross margin was 88.9% and the markup was 797.8%. It made $56 million on the opening weekend and was released on the 11th of June 2010. For the Great Wall sequences, all camera equipment had to be hand-carried as helicopters were not allowed up near the monument. Whilst this movie was in a remake of the 80s Karate Kid and is named the same, no actual karate is performed at all throughout the film. It is all kung fu. As noted on the featurette, Jackie Chan was the one who came up with the jacket routine as means of teaching Dre kung fu moves. I can change the slide. The technology of the production was rather different as it was around a 20 to 30 year gap. In the Karate Kid 1994 they used Panavision camera and lenses, where in the new version they used Aricam LT Cooke S4 lenses and Ariflex 435. The sound mix was Dolby in 1984 and Dolby Digital in 2010. The aspect ratio of the first film was 1.85 to 1 and 2.35 to 1 in the new one. The cinematographic process was spherical in the first film, whereas in the remake it was digital intimate 4K and Super 5 free perf. The printed film format for both films was 35mm. The Karate Kid 1984 was released on the 22nd of June 1984 and made 5,031,753 on the opening weekend. And the Karate Kid 2010 was released on the 11th of June 2010 and made 56 million on the opening weekend. During the time of the original Karate Kid, there are a lot of sports movies coming out. Sorry, I'll start that again. During the time of the original Karate Kid, there are a lot of sports movies coming out, such as the Rocky films. This led to the Karate Kid films being such a success as it allowed them to develop and continue on to become a trilogy. Bullying was also being tackled a lot more in the 80s, and in a way it was done best with the film. Bullying works with karate in this film because using karate, a martial art of defence and control, to stand up to the bullies. The Karate Kid for the first film was casted by Ralph Macchio, and the teacher was Noriyuki Pat Morita. The bad teacher was played by Martin Cove, and the bully was played by William Zackler. Daniel's mother in the film was played by Randy Keller, and his girlfriend was played by Elizabeth Shue. Whereas in the remake, it was the Karate Kid was played by Jaden Smith, and the teacher, Jackie Chan. The bad teacher's name was Yu Rong Kwang, and the bully's name was Zheng Hui Huang. The mother was played by Tara J. P. Henson, and the girlfriend, Wen Wen. Sorry about that. Comparing the two Karate Kids, both Smith and Macchio do a good job of playing their characters and represent the age group well. They're both cocky but have a sensitive side, and not the strongest, but will never back down from a fight. Daniel moves from Jersey to LA, California, and Dre moves from USA to China, so clearly Dre has a lot more to complain about. It's a much bigger change for him to adapt to, and at least in the place that Daniel goes to, they speak the same language. Dre has to adapt a lot more than Daniel does, and Dre also gets a lot more sympathy when he gets beaten up because he's a child, whereas Daniel does not get as much sympathy as he's a young man and beginning to learn that he has to stand up for himself. Whereas with Dre's age, it's still okay for an adult just to come in and stand in and sort of prop him out for him. Another important factor of the film is the age gap that the children have. Children always have fights and are often forgotten about quickly, whereas when you're a teen, your pride is on the line and is a lot more important to you. In my opinion, Daniel has a lot more to prove than Dre, but they both want to be left alone by bullies, but not at the cost of their dignity. I believe that Daniel was more determined than Dre, purely because of the age gap. Comparing the two teachers, there is no denying that Mr. Miyagi became an icon for an old, wise martial arts teacher back in the 80s. However, Jackie Chan really is an old, wise martial arts teacher. Mr. Miyagi leaves a lot more deceiving than Mr. Han because he is older and shorter and looks physically weaker, whereas Mr. Han looks more physically strong, and it was harder for him to make him look more deceiving. It was more predictable in the remake when it was coming, but then that could come from down to people knowing what was happening from the original. Mr. Han is more of a lost soul. He was destined for great things, but he's held back by his painful past, whereas Mr. Miyagi seems content with his life despite his painful past. Mr. Han seems a lot more believable and trustworthy when talking about Kung Fu, mainly because he is played by Jackie Chan, someone who is well known for martial arts and you know he knows what he's talking about. Unlike Mr. Miyagi, Mr. Han explains his method of teaching. A quote from the film, "Kung Fu lives in everything we do, Xiao Dre. It lives in how we put on a jacket, how we take off a jacket, and it lives in how we treat people. Everything is Kung Fu." Mr. Miyagi loses his wife and son in childbirth, and that was therefore not with them because he was in the army. Mr. Han lost his wife and son in a car crash. There is more guilt on his behalf because he was the one driving the car. This explains why he's more of a shut-in than Mr. Miyagi. Mr. Han learns from Dre just as much as he teaches him in the remake, whereas in the original he's very much teacher teaching student. Mr. Miyagi did not learn anything from Daniel until the later films in the trilogy. With Mr. Han being a lot more vulnerable, he's a lot more of an interesting character because of his past. Because him being a shut-in makes the audience more interested about him and want to wonder why he's a shut-in. therefore unravelling the entire backstory. In the original films, the teacher is off the rails and just all round over the top, and the student is your run-of-the-mill, horrible American high school bully. In the remake, they flip this around. The teacher is the bully and horrible, and the student seems to be the psychopathic child who just wants to do nothing but beat Dre up. The original is a lot more memorable because of how intense and over the top they were, and relatable the characters were. An over the top character will grasp the audience very well and excite them whenever they come onto the screen. And with the bully being a typical high school bully, which is seen in a lot of films, the audience understand him quickly and judge his character fast, due to the other films and the audience in America possibly relating to him people from their high school years. The teacher in the remake seems to want to prove himself to Mr. Hart a lot more than in the original. He is a lot more competitive and in cases trying to prove his teachings are better. When the villain hands the hero the trophy at the end of the film, it shows a lot more respect in the remake, landing in the remake. Again, boiling down to the age group. It seems a lot cuter in the remake because they're children, but in the original there's a lot more heart in it. In the original, the mother is a lot more loving but has a tough side to her as well. Whereas in the remake, the mother just seems to be a bit more of an airhead, always screaming for joy or being amazed by the tiniest things. However, this could be argued because that she's like this because she's also adapting to her new surroundings and is simply amazed by them. The remake makes the mother out to be a lot more stricter. This could again be down to the age group because she's still in the middle of raising her son, whereas Daniel is being a teen, majority of the raising has already been done by Daniel's mother. The girlfriend in the remake doesn't seem to be as supportive in the original. I think it's because in the original the girlfriend used to be in a relationship with the bully and has more of a vendetta against him. Whereas in the remake they are linked by families being friends, the link is not as strong. They're both caring and want to see their boyfriends do well, however in the original I feel as if she stands up for herself a lot more against the villain. Whereas in the remake the girlfriend seems to simply stand by and watch the majority of the time. Bullying was a big part of the 80s, and the movement against it was helped a lot by the Karate Kid film. The story shows Daniel being bullied throughout the film until he earns the respect from the bullies at the end. The message that this shows in this is that if you stand up for bullies, that they will begin to respect you and leave you alone. Many people would see the film and realise how bad it is and begin to act against it. A political factor for the Karate Kid would be the physical bullying that aside in the 2010 film. It is easily arguable that Dre was bullied because of his ethnicity, being different to all the other children. This is a very touchy subject which has to be done very carefully to avoid creating any political issues. There are several synergies between these two films. The first one is when Mr. Harm makes it look as if he's going to catch the fly between the chopsticks like in the original film, but then instead hits it with a fly swatter. Another one would be having the concept of wax on, wax off, but having a new twist with jacket on, jacket off. Also, Mr. Han's path is more painful than Miyagi's. He was the cause of the family's death, and Mr. Miyagi wasn't because they were in the army. There's still the same concept. They both feel guilt, but there's not as much bad for Mr. Miyagi than there is for Mr. Han. There's that synergy there. There's a distinctive age group in the new films. Daniel's in high school, whereas Dre seems that he's more in middle school. And instead of moving to a different part of America, he moves from America to China. Both stories are great coming-of-age sports movies. The remake does well to keep to the original whilst adding its own new twist. It has a big up fish-out-of-water impact, being the change of the location and the main character was on one side of the world to the other. The remake shows a lot more of the origins of Kung Fu, where the original shows no origins of karate. The bonds between teacher and student are shown strongly in both films. Both films are about balance and having the teacher teach the student and the student teach the teacher. The remake displays this a lot more than the original. However, the original had a sequel where I believe that it shows the student-teacher bond a lot stronger. The metaphor with the woman with the cobra in the remake is very clever. Is she copying the snake? Is the snake copying her? Or are they working as one? Is the teacher teaching the student? Is the student teaching the teacher? Or are they working as one? Dre uses the understanding of his enemy to his advantage by using an element of control, whereas Daniel just uses a non-defendable technique to win. Dre seemed to understand what he had learnt a lot more than Daniel and put it to use a lot better. I don't believe that the remake works as well as it could have because it tried to stay too true to the original. For example, the overtop teachers, the bullying, keeping the lovebirds apart to eventually end up together. If these points could have been taken out and made into a child training where he lived and learning kung fu whilst adjusting to his social life, the movie would have been a lot stronger. However, this then changes the film completely. It would not be a remake, and it would have just been its own thing. Parts of the remake are so realistic that it seems like Parts of the original are so realistic that it seems like everyday conversations are happening. However, the parts where they are so intense and unrealistic, like in the dojo, are so intense and unrealistic that it takes your attention away from this. The remake does not try to relate to real life at all. It's a movie, and it knows it's a movie, and it does a pretty good job of being a movie. However, the original is a lot more passionate, and compared to the remake, it is going to remain more well known. However, the remake does seem to be put more carefully together. At the end, I would give both films a 4-star rating. Thank you for listening to my presentation. And thanks for stopping by.